In 1998, Richard McDonald died in his home in Bedford, New Hampshire. He was 89 years old. His estate was valued at approximately $1.8 million. He had lived comfortably by most standards. He had no debts. He had a house and some savings and the quiet life he had said repeatedly that he had always wanted. The McDonald's restaurant nearest to his home was not his. None of them were. In 1998, there were approximately 24,000 McDonald's restaurants operating worldwide, generating tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. The name above every door, the golden arches on every sign, the system inside every kitchen, the specific way a burger was assembled and wrapped and handed through a window, all of it had been invented by Richard McDonald and his brother Maurice in a parking lot in San Bernardino, California, in 1948. Richard McDonald died worth $1.8 million. Ray Kroc, the milkshake machine salesman who had walked into their restaurant in 1954 and eventually taken their name, their system, and their legacy, had died 14 years earlier worth approximately $600 million. The handshake deal that was supposed to give the brothers 0.5% of all future McDonald's sales forever, the deal that Kroc allegedly made and then denied ever making, would be worth, by current calculations, somewhere between $650 million and $1 billion every single year. Every year. This is the story of what Dick and Mac McDonald actually built, and what happened to them after they built it. It is also the story of what Ray Kroc actually did, which is more complicated than either the celebration or the condemnation suggests. And it is the story of a handshake, and what a handshake is worth, and what it is worth when the person on the other side of it becomes the most powerful fast food operator in the history of the world. Dick and Mac McDonald were born in New Hampshire, the sons of a shoe factory foreman. They were New England in their bones, practical, reserved, hard-working, uncomfortable with extravagance. Around 1930, like so many young men of their generation, they went to California. California in the early 1930s was the place you went when you needed a different version of the story you were living. They tried Hollywood first. They worked as crew on film sets, the invisible labor that makes movies possible, and then they tried owning a movie theater in Glendale, which did not work well enough to sustain them. They moved into the restaurant business because the restaurant business in Southern California in the late 1930s was expanding with the same speed and logic as everything else in that economy, fueled by automobiles and sunshine and the specific American hunger for convenience. In 1937, they opened a food stand near the Monrovia airport selling primarily hot dogs. In 1940, they moved to a larger location at the corner of 14th and E Streets in San Bernardino, which they named McDonald's Barbecue. It was a drive-in, the format of the moment, 25 items on the menu, 20 car hops delivering food to customers who stayed in their cars, a model that had been working across California for years, and that worked for the McDonald brothers as well. Within a few years, it was the most popular teen hangout in San Bernardino. The money was good, the operation ran. By any conventional measure, they were successful. Then they did something that everyone who knew them told them was a mistake. In October 1948, they shut the restaurant down for 3 months. When it reopened, everything was different. The 25-item menu was gone. In its place, 9 items: hamburger, cheeseburger, soft drinks, milk, coffee, potato chips, and a slice of pie. Simple things. Things that could be prepared fast. The car hops were gone. The car hop model required people, and people were expensive and inconsistent and slow. The new McDonald's was self-service. You walked up to the window, you ordered, you paid, you waited a short time, you received your food. The kitchen had been redesigned from scratch. The brothers had watched their existing kitchen and identified every step that took time and eliminated it. They had designed workstations so that each person had a specific repeatable task. The patty was the same size every time. The assembly sequence was fixed. The sauce went on in a specific order. The wrapper went around in a specific way. The process was, in its structure, an assembly line applied to food production. They called it the Speedy Service System. The Speedy Service System deserves more attention than it usually receives, because it was not merely an efficiency improvement. It was a reconceptualization of what a restaurant was and what it was for. In 1948, the restaurant industry operated on a set of assumptions that had been stable for decades. A restaurant was a place where a customer was served by a person. The service was part of the experience. The variety of the menu was part of the appeal. The time you spent waiting was accepted as the cost of the experience. Dick and Mac McDonald questioned every one of these assumptions. They had watched their kitchen for years, and they understood which steps in the process were actually necessary, and which were there because no one had ever thought to remove them. The car hop model required staff to take orders, carry food to cars, collect money, and return change. Each of those steps took time. Each step that took time was a step that could produce an error or an inconsistency. The customer was paying in waiting time and in price for the cost of that labour. Remove the car hop, have the customer come to the window, reduce the menu to the items that could be produced fastest and most consistently. Design the kitchen so that each person had one specific job that they performed repeatedly, developing a speed and accuracy through repetition that a generalist could never match. The assembly line principle applied to food. Henry Ford had applied it to automobiles. The McDonald brothers applied it to hamburgers. The insight is the same. If you break a complex process into simple, repeatable steps and assign each step to a specialist, you produce more output in less time with greater consistency than any generalist system can achieve. The 15-cent hamburger was not cheap because the McDonald brothers were cutting corners. It was cheap because the system was efficient. Efficiency had lowered the cost, and the lower cost had been passed to the customer. This is the founding insight of the fast food industry. Every chain that followed, Burger King and Wendy's and Taco Bell and the entire infrastructure of American fast food, operates on the principle that Dick and Mac McDonald worked out in San Bernardino in 1948. The specific procedures differ. The underlying logic is identical. A 15-cent hamburger, ready in seconds, the same every time. Their customers hated it. The regulars who had been coming for years showed up and found that their favourite car hop was gone, and the menu had been reduced to a fraction of what it had been. They left and went to other drive-ins. The first weeks after the reopening were slow enough that people who knew the brothers assumed they had made a catastrophic error. Then something shifted. The speed attracted a different kind of customer. The price attracted customers who had been eating at home. The consistency meant that what you got on Tuesday was the same as what you got on Friday. The kitchen was producing food so fast and at such volume that the economics of the operation transformed. Lower prices brought more customers. More customers justified the stripped-down menu. The stripped-down menu enabled the speed. The speed enabled the lower prices. By the early 1950s, the McDonald's in San Bernardino was clearing roughly $100,000 a year in profit. That was a significant sum in 1952. The brothers had reinvented the restaurant from the ground up, and the reinvention worked. Other people noticed. The brothers began franchising in 1953. The first franchise location opened in Phoenix, Arizona. A second opened in Downey, California, which is still operating today, and is the oldest McDonald's in existence. By 1954, when a milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc made an appointment to come see them, they had sold the concept to more than 20 franchisees, of which roughly 10 had become operating restaurants. They had already done the hard part. They had already proven the concept, refined the system, and begun replicating it. Ray Kroc had heard about them because they had ordered 8 of his multi-mixer milkshake machines, the product he sold for a living. One restaurant using 8 machines simultaneously meant one restaurant making 40 milkshakes at once. Kroc could not understand how or why a single location would need that capacity. He flew to California to see for himself. Ray Kroc was born in Oak Park, Illinois in 1902. He left high school after his sophomore year, lying about his age to join the Red Cross Ambulance Corps during the First World War, though the war ended before he reached Europe. He came back to Chicago and spent the next 3 decades doing what talented salespeople without institutional backing do. He found products he believed in and sold them. Paper cups first, for the Lily Tulip Cup Company, where he worked for 17 years. The paper cup was a genuine innovation, a hygienic alternative to the shared metal cups that sat on public water fountains, and Kroc sold them with the conviction of someone who understood not just the product but the idea underneath it. Then milkshake machines, the multi-mixers, which he sold independently after leaving Lily Tulip. He was, by 1954, 52 years old, and a skilled salesman who had never built anything of his own. He had watched opportunities pass, had recognized them, had occasionally reached for them, and had always returned to the selling. The multi-mixer business was good. It was not extraordinary. When he walked into the San Bernardino McDonald's, He understood within minutes that he was looking at something extraordinary. The specific quality of Kroc's vision, the thing that made him different from other people who had seen the McDonald's operation and recognized that it was impressive, was that he could see it at scale. He did not see a successful hamburger stand. He saw 1,000 identical hamburger stands from coast to coast, each one replicating the speed and the price and the consistency of the original. He saw a system, and he understood that a system, properly replicated, was worth more than any individual restaurant could ever be. The brothers had built the system. Kroc saw what the system was worth if you removed the constraint of the brothers' caution. He called his wife that night from San Bernardino. He told her he had found his future. She was not convinced. She would divorce him in 1961, the same year he bought out the McDonald brothers, the same year Harry Sonneborn's real estate model was producing the cash flow that made the buyout possible. Kroc later married 2 more times, the last to Joan Smith, who became Joan Kroc, who would ultimately give away more than $1 billion to public radio and the Salvation Army and other causes after his death. But that is a different story. What he saw when he walked into the San Bernardino location changed the direction of his life. The line was long. The food came out fast. The kitchen was visible through a window, and it was moving with a precision and efficiency that Kroc, who had spent his career travelling to restaurants and watching kitchens operate, had never seen before. The prices were low enough that families who would not have eaten out at all were eating out here. The system was working exactly as the brothers had designed it to work. Kroc was 52 years old. He had spent his adult life selling things, paper cups and then milkshake machines, and he had done well enough but not spectacularly. He had the specific hunger of a man who had been reaching for the right opportunity for 30 years, and who knew, when he saw it, that this was it. He met the brothers. He proposed that they let him expand the concept nationally, beyond the California and Arizona territories they had already franchised themselves. They were skeptical. They were comfortable. They were not looking for a national expansion managed by a milkshake machine salesman from Chicago. He was persistent enough that they eventually agreed. The terms of the original 1954 agreement gave Kroc the right to franchise McDonald's restaurants across the United States, excluding the territories the brothers had already committed to other franchisees in California and Arizona. The brothers would receive 0.5% of the gross sales from each Kroc-operated franchise. Kroc would receive 1.4%, from which he would pay his operating costs. The arrangement left him with almost nothing after expenses. The margin between what he collected and what it cost him to run the franchise operation was thin enough that he was, for years, operating at a loss. The agreement also left him with almost no control. Every significant decision required the brothers' approval. The menu, the design, the procedures, all of it was defined by the San Bernardino operation, and the brothers were cautious, deliberate men who did not share Kroc's vision of 1,000 identical restaurants from coast to coast. Kroc spent 2 years trying to make the original agreement work. By 1956, he was borrowing money to cover his losses, borrowing against his life insurance, struggling to cover the basic costs of running a franchise operation that was growing in locations but not in profit. Then he met Harry Sonneborn. Harry Sonneborn had been a financial executive at Tasty Freeze, a soft-serve ice cream chain, before he encountered Ray Kroc. He was not a visionary in the way that Kroc was a visionary. He was something more practical and in some respects more valuable. He could see the financial structure of a business and identify where the money actually was, as distinct from where the participants thought it was. He looked at Kroc's McDonald's operation and said something that Kroc later described as the most important thing anyone ever told him. You are not in the hamburger business, you are in the real estate business. The insight was this. The franchisees were running the restaurants, but the real value was in the land beneath the restaurants. If McDonald's Corporation owned or controlled the land, it would have 2 revenue streams instead of 1. The franchise royalty from the hamburgers was thin and competitive. The rent from the real estate was steady, predictable, and compounding as property values increased. Sonneborn proposed forming a separate entity, which became the Franchise Realty Corporation, specifically to acquire and control the land and buildings of McDonald's locations. The corporation would lease or buy the site and then sublease it to the franchisee at a markup. The franchisee would pay rent to McDonald's in addition to the franchise royalty. If the franchisee failed to follow McDonald's standards, McDonald's could evict them because McDonald's owned the property. This was not merely a financial insight, it was a control mechanism. The real estate ownership gave Kroc the leverage over franchisees that his original franchise agreement with the brothers had not given him. He could enforce standards because he held the lease. He could remove a franchisee without breaking the franchise agreement because the property belonged to him. The Franchise Realty Corporation launched in 1956. By 1960, McDonald's restaurants were grossing $56 million annually. By 1961, when Kroc decided to buy out the McDonald brothers entirely, the company had over 200 locations. Today, McDonald's real estate holdings are valued at approximately $37 billion on the company's balance sheet. They represent roughly 99% of the company's total assets. The hamburgers finance the real estate. The real estate generates the power. The McDonald brothers had invented the system. Harry Sonneborn had invented the engine that turned the system into an empire. Ray Kroc had seen both and held them together. What nobody in the standard telling of this story spends enough time on is the specific moment in 1961 when Kroc decided he needed to own the entire operation and what he did to get it. By 1961, the relationship between Ray Kroc and the McDonald brothers had deteriorated to a point that both sides found unsustainable. The brothers were not ambitious in Kroc's sense of the word. They had built something they were proud of, they were receiving their royalties, and they had no desire to manage the complexity of a national operation, or to be constantly in conflict with a franchise agent who wanted to move faster and in different directions than they were comfortable with. They were in their 50s, they had money, they had Cadillacs in the garage, they did not owe anyone anything. Kroc needed to be free of the original agreement. The agreement gave the brothers approval rights over decisions that Kroc believed he needed to make unilaterally. Every time he wanted to adjust the menu, or change a procedure, or adapt to local market conditions, he was constrained by an agreement with two men in San Bernardino who had built a restaurant that worked in California and who were not convinced their system would work everywhere. He went to them in 1961 and asked them to name their price. The brothers deliberated. Dick McDonald later recalled the calculation. They wanted $1 million each after taxes. The taxes on a transaction of that size would require approximately $700,000 to cover. The total was $2.7 million. Kroc described his reaction to Time magazine in 1973. He said he dropped the phone, his teeth, and everything else. The number was, in 1961, an extraordinary sum. He did not have it. He had to borrow from multiple sources, pledge assets, and leverage the company's real estate holdings to secure the financing. He borrowed against everything he could borrow against. He paid the $2.7 million. He got the name, the system, the golden arches, the speedy service system, the right to operate McDonald's everywhere in the world. He did not get the San Bernardino restaurant. The brothers had retained the original location, the one they had built in 1948, as a specific exclusion from the sale agreement. It was their restaurant. They had built it. They intended to keep it. Kroc was furious. He had paid $2.7 million for the McDonald's brand, and the San Bernardino location was still not his. The most famous McDonald's in the world, the one that had started everything, the one that people would eventually visit as a historical site, belonged to the brothers. His response was not to accept this and move on. His response was to open a new McDonald's 1 block away from the brothers' original location. The brothers renamed their restaurant the Big M and kept operating. Kroc's new McDonald's 1 block away had all the advantages of the corporate system behind it: the supply chain, the marketing, the brand recognition that was growing every month as new locations opened across the country. The Big M had none of those advantages. It had the original location and the brothers' pride and gradually diminishing customer traffic, as the Golden Arches a block away drew the crowds that had once been theirs. The Big M closed in 1968. Maurice McDonald, who had watched this happen, died in 1971 at 69 years old. His family attributed his death in part to the stress of watching Ray Kroc systematically claim the legacy that the brothers had built. Dick McDonald later said he had watched his brother being torn up until the point that he died, and that he had decided not to let the same thing happen to himself. He moved to New Hampshire. He lived quietly. He gave interviews when people asked, and he gave them with the measured honesty of a man who had made his decisions and lived with them and did not see much point in extended bitterness. In 1991, 30 years after the buyout, McDonald's Corporation finally acknowledged the brothers in Founders' Day advertising. An executive was quoted admitting that the founder issue had become an issue, that it was embarrassing. For 30 years, the company whose name they had given the world had pretended, in its official history and its marketing, that Ray Kroc had founded McDonald's in 1955, when he opened his first franchise location in Des Plaines, Illinois. Dick McDonald died in 1998, $1.8 million. Now pay attention to this next part, because it is the part of the McDonald's story that the movie and the books and the business school case studies consistently mention, and then move past without sitting with it long enough: the handshake. When Ray Kroc bought the brothers out in 1961 for $2.7 million, the transaction was documented in a formal legal agreement. The agreement covered the name, the system, the intellectual property, the franchise rights. It was a real document signed by real parties with real lawyers present. According to the McDonald family, there was also something else: an informal agreement made separately in which Kroc promised the brothers a perpetual royalty of 0.5% on all future McDonald's sales. Not in the contract, a handshake, a promise between men who'd been doing business together for 7 years and who understood each other, at least in the practical sense of understanding what the other person was likely to do. 0.5% of McDonald's annual gross sales today is approximately $650 million every year, forever. Kroc denied the handshake deal existed. In his autobiography, Grinding It Out, published in 1977, he described the buyout in terms that omit any mention of a perpetual royalty promise. He described the $2.7 million as the complete and total transaction. There is no written record of the handshake deal. There are family accounts, passed down through people who were told the story by Dick and Mac McDonald, who are no longer alive to be questioned under oath. There are no documents, no witnesses who could testify to what was said in the room, no record that Kroc acknowledged the promise at any point after 1961. The law says a handshake deal is unenforceable. The law is correct about this in a technical sense. A verbal agreement without corroborating evidence cannot be enforced in court, and the McDonald family has never won any legal action to recover the royalties. What cannot be resolved by the law is the question of what was actually said, whether a promise was made and broken, or whether the family constructed a narrative about a promise that was never made. Ray Kroc is dead. Dick and Mac McDonald are dead. The room in 1961 is gone. What remains is the arithmetic. 0.5% of current sales running back to 1961, compounded over 60 years, produces a number that is very large. And Dick McDonald died in 1998 worth $1.8 million. The standard defense of Ray Kroc, which his admirers make consistently and with some justification, is that the McDonald brothers did not want what Kroc built, that their vision was deliberately small, deliberately local, deliberately comfortable, that they had tried franchising before Kroc and had done it cautiously and without ambition for national scale, that Kroc took a system that worked in San Bernardino and turned it into something that fed the world, and that without his energy and vision and willingness to borrow against everything he owned, the McDonald brothers would have remained a successful regional chain, and nothing more. This defense is not wrong, it is also not complete. What Kroc built, he built with a name he did not create, a system he did not invent, and a concept whose core insight, that food could be produced like a factory product, had been developed by 2 men from New Hampshire in a parking lot in 1948. The golden arches were designed by the brothers. The speedy service system was designed by the brothers. The specific assembly process, the limited menu, the self-service window, all of it was theirs. Kroc added 3 things. He added the will to expand at a scale the brothers never contemplated. He added Harry Sonneborn's real estate insight, which gave the expansion a financial engine it would not otherwise have had. And he added the corporate machinery, the supply chains and training systems and quality control operations that made identical restaurants possible across thousands of locations. These are not small contributions. They are genuine contributions. A system that works for 1 restaurant does not automatically work for 24,000. The gap between those 2 numbers is filled with decisions and resources, an organizational capability that Kroc and his team provided. But here is the thing that the celebration of Kroc consistently elides. He opened a McDonald's one block from the brothers' original restaurant to drive them out of business. He denied a handshake promise that his counterparties say he made. He spent 30 years allowing his company to claim that he had founded McDonald's in 1955, erasing from the official history the two men whose name was on the building. These are not minor details. They are choices, made by a man who understood exactly what he was doing and why. Maurice McDonald died in 1971. Dick McDonald died in 1998. Ray Kroc died in 1984, worth approximately $600 million. The estate of Dick McDonald was valued at $1.8 million. The math is not the point exactly. Dick McDonald said in interviews that he had no regrets, that he had wanted a comfortable life and he had gotten a comfortable life, that yachts on the Riviera were not his style, that if he had stayed in the business he would have wound up with ulcers and tax attorneys and a life he did not want. He may have been telling the truth about all of this. He was not a man who seemed to perform emotions he did not feel. What is harder to dismiss is what his nephew Ronald McDonald said. Not the clown. Ronald McDonald, the brother's actual nephew, who watched the family's relationship with Kroc unfold over decades and who said, directly, that it was all about ego. That Kroc could not stand the idea that someone else had built the thing before him. That the McDonald's one block from the brothers' original location was not a business decision, it was personal. Maurice, the brother who took it hardest, died at 69 of heart failure that the family attributed partly to the stress of watching his legacy claimed by someone else. Dick watched his brother die and decided not to let it kill him too. He moved to New Hampshire and lived for another 27 years. In 1991, McDonald's Corporation acknowledged the brothers in its advertising for the first time, 30 years after the buyout. The executive who admitted it was embarrassing was correct that it was embarrassing. He did not explain why it had taken 30 years. There is a detail about the McDonald's story that sits outside the brothers' narrative and that deserves to be included in any honest accounting of what the company actually is. McDonald's today is not primarily a hamburger company. Ray Kroc told a group of MBA students this directly when he was alive. He asked them what business McDonald's was in. They said hamburgers. He said no. You are not in the hamburger business, he said. You are in the real estate business. McDonald's Corporation owns or controls the real estate underneath approximately 90% of its franchise locations. The hamburger pays the rent pays the profit, the land appreciates. The company's balance sheet shows $37 billion in real estate assets, representing roughly 99% of the company's total assets. The McDonald brothers invented a way to make a hamburger fast and cheaply and consistently. What Ray Kroc and Harry Sonneborn built on top of that invention was a real estate company that uses hamburgers as a collection mechanism for rent. The brothers were paid $2.7 million for the invention. The real estate company built on top of it is worth over $200 billion. This is not presented as a conspiracy. It is presented as the actual structure of the business, which is more interesting than the conspiracy version, because it is true, and because it tells you something about how the largest fortunes in America are built. Not on products, usually. On the land beneath the products. The brothers did not know this in 1961 because nobody had worked it out yet. Sonneborn worked it out in 1956. By 1961, when Kroc bought the brothers out, the Franchise Realty Corporation had been operating for 5 years, and the real estate model was already producing the cash flow that the hamburger business alone could not. The brothers sold the hamburger business. They did not know they were also selling the real estate company that was being built around it. The distinction between those two things is worth approximately $200 billion. The question of who deserves credit for McDonald's is one that the company itself has answered differently at different times, and the evolution of those answers is worth tracing. From 1955, when Kroc opened his Des Plaines franchise location, until 1991, the official McDonald's history treated Kroc as the founder. The brothers existed in company documents as prior operators whose concept Kroc had licensed, but the narrative centered on Kroc and the Des Plaines restaurant and the corporation he built. The anniversary that McDonald's celebrated was 1955, not 1940 or 1948. The brothers were alive for much of this period and were giving interviews in which they described their own role. Dick McDonald was not a bitter man in public. He gave measured, precise accounts of what had happened and did not perform outrage. But the facts he described contradicted the official corporate history, and anyone who read his interviews and McDonald's corporate materials was reading two different accounts of the same events. In 1991, the company's marketing team concluded that the discrepancy had become untenable. The phrase was, as reported, that the founder issue had become an issue. The company began including Dick and Mac McDonald in its official history and its Founders' Day acknowledgements. 36 years after Kroc opened his first franchise. 43 years after the brothers opened their redesigned restaurant in 1948. When the 2016 film The Founder was released, starring Michael Keaton as Ray Kroc, it brought the story to a mass audience for the first time. The film was broadly sympathetic to the brothers and critical of Kroc, though it compressed events and altered some details in ways that historians of the company have noted. Kroc's estate and the McDonald's Corporation both declined to endorse or support the film. The film made approximately $30 million at the box office, against a budget of approximately $15 million. It was critically well received. It did not substantially alter the public's understanding of McDonald's history, because the public's understanding of McDonald's history is formed primarily by eating at McDonald's, not by watching films about it. What the film did do, quietly and without announcement, was introduce the handshake deal to a wide audience, the 0.5% royalty that the brothers said they were promised and never received, the calculation that it would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars per year. That calculation, once introduced, does not leave the mind easily. Dick McDonald said he had no regrets. His brother Maurice died at 69. The arithmetic remains. Dick McDonald said he had no regrets. He said this in 1991, when McDonald's finally acknowledged his existence, and he had been saying versions of it for 30 years before that. He was a practical man who had grown up the son of a shoe factory foreman, and who had built something extraordinary and sold it and lived well on what he received for it. And he did not seem to spend his remaining years performing a grief he did not feel. But his nephew Ronald said it was about ego. His brother Maurice died at 69 of a heart that the family said had been broken. His original restaurant, the one they excluded from the sale because they wanted to keep at least that, was driven out of business by a McDonald's that opened 1 block away. The handshake deal that was supposed to protect them, the promise of 0.5% of all future sales, was never put in writing and was never honoured. And McDonald's Corporation spent 30 years telling the world that Ray Kroc had founded the company in Des Plaines, Illinois in 1955. On the website of the McDonald's Corporation today, the history section acknowledges the brothers. It calls them visionaries. It says that Ray Kroc, inspired by their operation, founded the modern McDonald's Corporation. Inspired by their operation. That is one way to say it. Ray Kroc died on January 14, 1984, at the age of 81 from heart failure. He had been worth approximately $600 million at the time of his death, though the family's subsequent charitable activities and his wife Joan's philanthropy, which ran to over $1 billion over her lifetime, dispersed much of what remained. He was celebrated and continues to be celebrated as one of the great entrepreneurs of the 20th century. The Des Plaines restaurant he opened in 1955 was preserved as a museum until 2018, when it was demolished to make way for other development. A replica exists in some form, somewhere. The San Bernardino location where the brothers invented everything in 1948 was torn down in 1971, after the Big M closed. On the site today there is a small museum, privately operated, in a building that is not the original building. The original building is gone, the parking lot where Dick and Mac McDonald redesigned their kitchen and invented modern fast food is a parking lot again. The name above every McDonald's in the world belongs to men who have been dead for decades, whose estate totaled $1.8 million in 1998, and whose handshake agreement is worth, by any honest calculation, somewhere between $650 million and $1 billion every single year. Every year. Forever. If it had been in writing. Dick McDonald said he had no regrets. The arithmetic has its own opinion about that.